Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and today I want to talk about. I'm secretly knitting. Not that. I want to talk about my experience of the project that I set myself in 2024, which was to read majority books, so over 50% books published before the year 2000. I had a couple kind of exceptions that didn't count. And I kind of also sort of developed some of it as I went along, but it's very simple ultimately. At the beginning I thought it was going to be much more complicated, but no, it's just that I wanted to read over 50% books published from before the year 2000 and I wasn't going to include rereads in that, and I also wasn't going to include books that I picked up when I was in New York, because I didn't want those to count against me, because I wanted to read them. Which I did do a much better job of picking up some of them at the beginning of the year. I think I read 5, and then I ended the year currently reading a 6th, something around that. So before I get into the specifics of what I actually read, and also the numbers, I thought I would just kind of chat in a more general way about the experience of it. Basically, I didn't like it. I mean, that's not completely true. I think, by the end of the year I was just getting quite grumpy, and I really didn't like how it did impact what I could pick up and what I could finish and when. But I also didn't really like that I did find it hard. I kind of wanted it to be easy, but it was still quite difficult. And that was for a number of reasons. I mean, part of it is that this year the shape of my reading has been quite strange, I would say. I mean, not massively different really, but I stopped being able to read for a little while, especially kind of recreationally. The only thing I could read was kids books, so I read a lot of children's literature this year, which isn't something that I previously had done that much. I mean, a little bit here and there, and also coupled with that, although not always, I did do more rereading, I think I would say. And again, that's also because, I wanted to read recreationally, but was struggling, so then rereading things is easy, and then especially rereading children's books is especially easy. So that has definitely impacted kind of the shape of my reading and the shape of the year. And then, in the past kind of 5 months, I have been fairly depressed. I mean, it's sort of been rough. 2024 was kind of a wild year in the sense that it was pretty bad, but I also feel like I've done fairly well with it in a way, but I'm also suffering. So, yeah. I kind of also did expect this to happen, but it does look like I basically read the most from the 90s of the decades of non-2000s that I read from. And now I will tell you some actual numbers and stuff. I read 74 books in 2024, all together. Then if we take away the rereads, there is 65 total. And then if we take away the books that I read for that were from New York that I wasn't counting, then there's 60. And I read 34 books published before 2000 from 1999 to, I think, what was the earliest, maybe 1819 I read something from that. So that does mean it's over 50%. It is in fact 56%. So that's good, and it means I was successful. And I suppose part of it was that by the end of the year I really wanted to succeed, because I had basically done it, but then I still had to keep reading and making specific choices, even though I just didn't really want to, and I was having a pretty rough time in December. So that was also why I got more grumpy about it. But I definitely won't be redoing this challenge. But I guess I'll talk about that a little bit later, about kind of the next steps, or the next things I want to do. And because from what I learned from doing this project, I do feel in some way it was a little successful in how I did tune out a little bit from new release, and I also did buy less books, considerably less books, and I think maybe quite a large part of that was to do with this reading and this reshuffle, and so encouraging myself to read books from my bookshelves that were older, but also just in general. And so that's good. Definitely still more to be improved, especially in terms of reading more from my bookshelves, but that's okay. It's all, it feels like I made some good steps, that's fine. Would you like to hear a list of all the books I read that count for this challenge? I'm gonna read them. This is an order of when I read them. Also, I will say that my Natalia Ginzburg reading really helped me out this year. Number 1 was The Journal of Catherine Mansfield from 1927. Number 2 was Rastetime in Palestine by Benjamin Zephaniah in 1990. Number 3 was Carpe Jagulum by Terry Pratchett from 1998. The Road to the City by Natalia Ginzburg, translated by Francis Frenier from 1942. Men at Arms, also by Terry Pratchett from 1993. The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginzburg, translated by Francis Frenier, I think, from 1947. Poor Things by Alistair Gray from 1992. Valentino, also by Natalia Ginzburg. I couldn't find the translator, and I don't have a copy of it, but I will try to find and put it here. Published in 1957. Also, for the translated work, I've taken the original publication, not in the language difference, like from the original, which is generally how I approach this. The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing from 1962. Voices in the Evening by Natalia Ginzburg again, translated by unknown, I will indicate here, from 1961. The Little Virtues, also by Natalia Ginzburg, also translated by people I couldn't find online in my quick search, but again I will try to indicate here, from 1962. Family Lexicon by Natalia Ginzburg, translated by Jenny McPhee from 1963. Women of the Harlem Renaissance, which was like an anthology of various writers, lots of different women, and I think that the earliest in that collection was from 1918, and maybe the latest is from like 1930 or something. It sort of bridges that time, I would say, like 1920s generally. During Sleepless Nights and Other Stories by Anna Margolin, translated by Daniel Kennedy, which I think was published in 1909. The Reptile Room by Lamini Snicket, which was published in 1999. Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh from 1945. The Secret History by Donald Hart from 1992. The Whale Rider by Witi Ihimera published in 1987. Happiness as Such by Natalia Ginzburg, translated by Minna Zarwin Proctor from 1973. Not by Birth Alone, Conversion to Judaism by Walter Jacob, Walter Homolka and Esther Seidel, edited by them, from 1997. The Road to the City by Natalia Ginzburg, translated by Jeannie L. Hader from 1942 again. Who Was Changed and Who Was Dead by Barbara Comins from 1954. Loitering with Intent by Muriel Spark from 1981. Seasons of Our Joy, A Modern Guide to the Jewish Holidays by Arthur O. Waskow from 1982. Amy Furness Scholar by Catherine St. John Conway from 1896. The Story of a Modern Woman by Ella Hepworth Dixon from 1894. The Story of an African Farm by Olive Schreiner from 1883. Shirley by Charlotte Bronte from 1849. The Vampire by John William Polidori from 1819. The First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells from 1901. Let Loose by Mary Chumley from 1890, I think. It's a short story. Five Children and It by E. Nesbit from 1902, Sorcery by Terry Pratchett from 1988, and The Phoenix and the Carpet by E. Nesbit from 1904. Yeah, I think there are also two books that I reread that were from the 2000s, but I decided just not to count any rereads, as opposed to just counting the ones that counted in terms of pre-2000s and then not the ones that don't, because that felt silly. In terms of the decades that I read from, like I said, the 1990s wins quite significantly, I think, with 7 books, and I guess it would be 8 if I did include that other reread, but I'm not, so 7. And the one decade of the 20th century that I did not read from was the 1930s. And I did have a kind of accessory goal to this goal, which was to read a book published from each decade of the 20th century. So I didn't complete that because of the 1930s. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I got every decade. I could be incorrect if I'm wrong about when the Anna Margolin book was published. In fact, yeah, so this is a collection, and I think 3 out of 4 of them are from 1909 and the other one's from 1914. So yeah, I've covered the 1900s definitely, and also 1910s from the various stuff in the Women of Harlem Renaissance, and then also I guess the final story in this if you want. I'm sorry if you don't care, but I think this is interesting, at least to me, so I'm gonna talk about it. But obviously if you don't care, you just don't watch this video. The second highest number of books from a decade is 4, and I read 4 from the 1980s, the 1960s and the 1940s. Mostly thanks to Natalia Ginzburg and also Natalia Ginzburg. But obviously the 1980s is more the Muriel Spark and stuff like that. And then the 1920s I read, I think, 2, the Diary of Catherine Mansfield or Journal, and also the various bits from The Women of the Harlem Renaissance collection. 1910s I read 2, I guess, including that short story from the collection of Anna Margolin. And from the 1900s I read 4, mostly because of the E. Nesbit books I read, and also the H.G. Wells one, I guess, and then the Anna Margolin. Anyway, I only read 1 book from the 1880s, which was the Olive Schreiner, and then I read 3 books from the 1890s, which doesn't surprise me at all. That's my sweet spot, I guess. And I also kind of am thinking I might make a video of like an 1890s TBR for 2025, perhaps 1880s too. So yeah, that was the kind of overview and what I read for this project. I did also see how many books that I read from the 2000s, as in not like 2000s, 2010s and 2020s, but literally just that first decade of the 2000s, because I also kind of thought that it would be a bit bigger than normal because it would be like close but not close enough. And I read 9 books from that decade, which is interesting, and of course is more than how many I read for the 1990s. But a massive part of that is because of a series of unfortunate events which I have been reading in 2024, and I hadn't read before except from the first book, which is why it's not counted on the pre-2000s list. I definitely don't feel... I think I had quite a low star rating this year as an average. I don't normally like look because it doesn't really tend to give me that much information, but I do feel like that does reflect how I've been feeling about my reading, which is that like I haven't been super enjoying it. There obviously are like highlights, but when I went to make my best of video, I did struggle a little bit, and I think I said in that like I was kind of sad that I hadn't read books for certain categories or certain kind of themes that I love and like want to be reading from. And you know, part of that is that I felt like I was a bit circumscribed by this project. You know, that's a shame. I am really glad that I succeeded, I guess I should say, because I do feel like I put in quite a lot of work, and I was trying to kind of change some of my thinking and my like relationship to like the newness of some books, you know, so that was successful and that was good. I hope you can't hear like the clicking of my needles, but I just wanted it. So like I completed this project, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. And even though I didn't complete the secondary kind of project of reading a book from each decade of the 20th century, I did quite enjoy that as like a way to get a sort of nice overview, and it was quite fun to use that to direct my reading a little and to have like a little bit of structure without feeling like it was too much, which I think this project did feel. So in response to that, what I thought, I don't think I really need that much encouragement to read books from the 1990s, obviously because I am reading the Discworld series. That's fairly easy, and then like yeah, you know, it's fine. But what I thought that instead for 2025, my goal would be to try to read a book from every decade from the 1880s to the 1980s. And I feel like that covers the section of the Victorian era that I'm most interested in, as well as is my academic research is from then into the early 20th century, so you know, that's useful. And it covers the 20th century in a way that's also kind of interesting to me as well. So it's like 100 years, so that's like 10 decades still. And yeah, I think that should be like a fairly pleasing project. I have picked out some books for it. I think this video is going to be like kind of long, but like I think I will go through them now. I mean, quite a lot of them are overlaps from that video I made showing all the classics I bought this year, but yeah, and they're not set in stone either. Like I might pick up different ones. I have like quite a lot of options, so that's nice. But yeah, I thought I could share them with you in this video. Before I do though, I'm just going to see if there's anything else I wanted to say about doing this project. So in my best books of the year videos, I do have like a sort of recurring category, which is like most remarkable book for its publication date, which I think all began with Despised and Rejected by Rose Alatini, which is like a pacifist novel that was published in 1918 and is gay. Like it's got 2 queer characters, one of whom is like a gay man and the other who is like a lesbian, but also she could be bisexual. It's sort of unclear what she's supposed to be, you know, but she's sort of told that she's a lesbian by the gay character, as far as I remember. I did read this like 6 years ago, so but that was a pretty like incredible book for me. So, and I like that as a category, so that's what I also said in this year's one. I also did talk about like a gay novel, which was, or novella I guess, which was Amy Furness Scholar by Catherine St. John Conway, which was published in 1896, and yeah, it's just like sort of crazily gay, and it's also like not like, it sort of subsumes the gayness into heterosexuality, especially the ending, but at the same time like it's still pretty gay. But I think for that category this year I could have also said the Doris Lessing novel was also most remarkable for its publication date, because it is a pretty remarkable book. It's from the 60s and it sort of preempts like so much of like 70s Marxist feminism. I thought that was pretty remarkable, and I think it's like an incredible book anyway, sort of outside of that specific political context, but also I think what makes it so special is its political language framework, its like engagement with Marxism, but also its sort of commitment to like personal and interior life, in a way that's just like and just kind of sings in terms of literary form too. Anyway, it's a really fantastic book, but I do feel like it was interesting to read a collection of things from the 1960s, including mostly Natalia Ginzburg, but then also adding in The Golden Notebook too. I think in terms of the diversity of my reading, I would say it really suffered this year, partially because of this project, and then partially because I struggled to read stuff, so I just read kids' books, and I also read stuff on audio, which like for me in terms of like library usage and like availability, like often like yeah, writers of colour's work is just not as available, and obviously that's bad, and I think it is a shame for my reading. There's not much else to say, that just like it's not good, and I'm not happy with that. That I definitely could have read more. It's not that there aren't, you know, like works published from the 20th century that are by people of colour, like that's ludicrous. They sometimes are like a little bit harder to find, I suppose, and then they're also less likely to be on audio, for example. But also I was trying to read my shelves, which are skewed towards white authors for sure, partially because I have books that have been on my shelves for a long time, and so were picked up when I was much less conscious of the racial biases that I had, and or the fact that I was only really hearing about white authors. I do read a lot of women, but that does ultimately lead me to be reading a lot of white women. I mean, I think like aside from Terry Pratchett, who is like the one man author that I kind of like return to because I'm reading his Discworld series, there's like barely any men in this list. There is Benjamin Zephaniah, who was lovely, and Alistair Gray. Okay, let's see. So out of 34, 12 of those were men. If you just count Terry Pratchett once, then I think that makes 9 or something, and like one of those was a book that was written by, or like edited by, 2 men and a woman, which is I think higher than normal. And obviously I haven't counted like for the rest of my reading, but I imagine the majority were women as well. It's not really representative of women because I'm only reading like a select group of women, you know, specifically white women. So that's definitely something that like I look forward to shifting in 2025 a bit. Shall we move on to talking about the 2025 potential reading? I think we should. This is like what I'm knitting, just this like very easy scarf, because my other scarf is kind of irritating my skin a bit. I don't know how long this will be, but hopefully it'll be okay. Okay, I don't have one book for each year, I have multiple. So classic me. From the 1880s, I've got The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James and The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I would like to read both, but obviously I'm trying to do this Henry James reading project in 2025. I keep having to think, you know, before I say the year. So obviously this is like a priority. Then for the 1890s, I of course have 3 options. I'll show you them in the order that I think is like least to most likely to read, or like least to most priority to read. So the first is Esther Waters by George Moore, which I picked up near the end of last year. Then we have A Sunless Heart by Edith Johnstone, which seems like a very intense novel, and I definitely like to read it. But I think I'd like to read Liza of Lambeth by Somerset Maugham, W. Somerset Maugham, sorry. The most, because it has now been on my shelf for at least a year, I think. I'm pretty sure I had it not this Victober but the last one, so that's sort of why it's the most priority. But I would really like to get to this too. It's just I have so many books, you know. Then for the 1900s we have 3 options as well. We've got A Woman's Affair by Leanne Pougy, translated by Graham Anderson, which is another book that was on a couple TBRs from 2024. Also, I've been trying to figure out if I should make a video where I like go through the TBRs I made in 2024 and see like overall how successful I am. I don't know if that would be interesting to anyone other than me, and I'm not even sure if that's interesting to me, but I think it could be interesting. I don't know. So yeah, but there's A Woman's Affair, then there's A Girl Among the Animists, then there's A Girl Among the Anarchists by Isabel Meredith. This is more of like a PhD thing, so I probably wouldn't like prioritize it for this project, but if I did read it, then I could count it for this. And also another French translated book. This is Claudine at School by Colette, translated by Antonia White. So this is the first in the Claudine series, and I definitely want to get to this year. I can't really tell you which one is priority between these two, but I suppose, I don't know. I'm going to leave both of them in the priority section. I've just got one for the 1910s so far, but I might have more on my shelves. But yeah, this is Miss Nobody by Ethel Carney, or Ethel Carney Holdsworth. I wanted to read it in like last year. It's on my autumn/winter TBR, so I think like, yeah, hopefully I will pick this up in January, maybe February. But yeah, this is making me excited. This was a good idea. We do have a book that I am currently reading for the 1920s. I do have another book that is actually being used for my phone to rest on. It also is from the 1920s, I think. So that's like another option. And I have a couple. I was thinking I might make a video where I talk about the 1920s books on my TBR. But is that like boring if I make one about the 1890s books on my TBR? Let me know. Yeah, but this is Silk of the Wild by Zuzman Segalovich, translated by Daniel Kennedy from the Yiddish. I'm 92 pages in. It's 276 pages. It's a pretty small book. I just sort of haven't got the momentum with it, I guess, because I have been reading it like in bits and starts. But hopefully I will finish this sometime soonish. So yeah. Then from the 1930s, I really would like to read something from the 1930s because I didn't last year, and that was the gap. I did start reading, did I start reading it last year or the year before? Anyway, I was reading After the Death of Don Juan by Sylvia Townsend Warner, and I kind of just got like stuck with that. I might return to it, you know, it's still up there, I could, and that's from the 1930s, and so I guess that's partially why I didn't get to anything from that, but it's also because, you know, I didn't like pick it up. But yeah, so I have two options. I've got Miriam Karpilov, sort of collection of stories. I don't think all of these are from the 30s, but I think the majority are. Oh no, this says 19 stories originally published in Vorwärts in the 1930s. So yeah, this is A Provincial Newspaper and Other Stories, translated from Yiddish by Jessica Kurzing. I think this will be somewhat challenging, but interesting. I do really like the previous Miriam Karpilovs that I've read, and I think, even though politically we would definitely disagree, I like her a lot. She's dead, like, you know. And then I've also got The Pure and the Impure by Colette again. This one is translated by Herma Buffo. And yeah, this has been on my TBR for quite a long time now, but I think I kind of want to read earlier Colette first, so we'll see. I mean, this one is, I think, definitely more of a priority, because I'd also really like to read Yiddish women writers, because I failed. I mean, I read one last year, but yeah, then the year before I read none, so it's not feeling great. For the 1940s, I have two options. Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. A lot of this is translated, I'm realising. Translated from the Portuguese by Alison Entrequin, or Entrequin. This has been on many TBRs too. I don't think I put it on so many TBRs this year, maybe just one for my Women in Translation Month reading, but it's one I really want to get to, so it's definitely a priority. I do also have this book, which is Green Hands by Barbara Whitten, which is also from the 1940s, and I put this on a sort of like vague TBR that I made on TikTok for last year, and I didn't get to it. So it's not like super high priority, but it would be nice to read. For the 1950s, I just have one. This is All Our Yesterdays by Natalia Ginzburg. I think I have this and then maybe one more of hers on my shelves that I want to read, and then I've sort of finished reading Natalia Ginzburg for me. There's maybe one more actually, like novella, that the library has that I would read. And this was translated by Angus Davison. It's a quite chunky one, and also, you know, I spilled like soy sauce on it, my bad. For the 1960s, I have two. We've got Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller, and The Snowball by Bridget Brophy. I think of these two, I would probably put this one as the most likely to be picked up, but it really depends on the vibe. But I did want to get to it this year, so, or like in 2024, so I guess I will put that one in the definites. I only have one for the 1970s, and I did only read one book from the 1970s too last year. I feel like the 1970s is a bit of a gap, because obviously 1980s, 1990s I have quite like a sort of smattering, and then 1960s I did have a bunch, and 1950s, 40s, you know, But the 1970s, yeah, seems to be a bit of a gap. So if you have any book recs from the 1970s, let me know. I mean, I'm not sure that I would pick them up, but I'd be interested. Anyway, so for the 70s, we've got Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko. This has also been on my TBR for a while. I'd really like to read it this year. Then for like the final decade of this challenge, I've got 3 potentials for the 1980s. I've got Cassandra by Christa Wolf, which was translated by, from the German, by Jan van Herk, which, yeah, seems to be like a really fascinating novel that is like a Greek myth retelling, but also a way to talk about what it's like to live in the German Democratic Republic. I also have Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich, which is another book that I brought back from New York and didn't get to this year. So it's definitely like high up there on picking up, but I think the most priority actually for this section, just because like I'm the most interested in it, is Dikti by Teresa Ha-Kyung Cha, which just looks like a really fascinating mixed media, interesting book. Experimental, yeah, language work. So I'm gonna put that as my priority pick for the 1980s, I think. There's definitely no guarantee that I will read these specific ones. I think I probably will be able to manage this challenge fairly well, because I just like these books, I'm interested in them, and I do like reading like older books. So, you know, my issue with my pre-2000s reading challenge wasn't that I didn't want to read books before 2000, it was just that, yeah, it controlled heavily what I could pick up and when I could pick up stuff. So I had to kind of like, if I had an impulse towards a book, I couldn't follow through it because, you know, I had to make sure that I was keeping at least 50% or more like pre-2000s published. So these are, oops, we all knew that was going to happen. These are the main ones for each decade then. With, which decade had 2? I think the 1900s still has 2 decades. 2 books, I mean. But yeah, there they are. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know if you did like a challenge like this. I saw somebody once, a couple years ago, did a challenge where she wouldn't read any books published after 1950, which must have been even harder. I mean, like, I don't think I could do that. Which, yeah, I feel like, again, I don't really like that is the case, but I do think a large part of it is just because I am quite like an impulsive creature. And because I do have to do like work reading, it means that in my non-work reading I just want to like be free. So having kind of very specific projects like that, or particular, like, you know, that's like a line, you know, as opposed to like, you could argue, you know, if you're trying to read like more fantasy books or like whatever, you could argue that like some book that isn't really a fantasy is a fantasy because of XYZ. For things that are like about publication date, you can't argue that it was published in a different year because it wasn't published in a different year. I guess the only leeway you can have is if you go by the translation publication or not. Anyway, so learned some stuff about myself. Glad I committed. Didn't enjoy very much. And 2025 will hopefully be a better year and also a better reading year. I think that's everything I wanted to share and talk about. Like I said, definitely let me know if you've like done a project like this, or if you had any tips from it, or what you think about like a kind of decade reading challenge, and if you have any 1970s recommendations, but honestly any recommendations. I did kind of consider including the 1870s in this as well, but I did decide that like 100 years would be good, but it would be cool if I could read something from the 1870s. I think if I read Hardy's first like debut novel, that would count, so I could just do that. I don't know. Anyway, I think that's everything that I had to say, finally. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope it was interesting. And yeah, I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye!